What happens when a billionaire's cruel joke backfires in the most spectacular way imaginable. In the glittering heart of New York City, a single stain of red wine on $1,000 suit ignites a firestorm of public humiliation. For Sebastian Sterling, the city's most arrogant tech mogul, it was a chance to make an example of a clumsy waitress. He offered her a challenge meant to break her, a mocking proposal in front of the city's elite, dance a perfect tango, and he would marry her. He expected tears. He expected failure. He never expected that the woman in the cheap apron was a queen in exile, and he had just handed her the keys to his kingdom and his heart. The air in the Serafina was thick with the scent of money and truffle oil. It was a place where conversations were conducted in hushed, confident tones, and the clinking of Cristofler silverware against Bernardeau porcelain was the evening's primary soundtrack. For Celestine Rossi, it was just another Tuesday, another 12-hour shift on her feet, another night of smiling through the ache in her calves and the deeper ache in her soul. Her uniform, a starched black dress with a crisp white apron, felt like a costume from a life she was never meant to lead. It was neat, it was clean, but it was a cage. She moved between tables with a practiced grace, her steps economical and silent, a ghost refilling water glasses and clearing away the remnants of exorbitant meals. Her face was a mask of pleasant neutrality. Her dark eyes, which once held the fire of 1,000 spotlights, now carefully guarded and observant. Tonight, table 12 was the center of the restaurant's universe. It was occupied by Sebastian Sterling and his entourage. Even if you didn't read the business pages, you knew him. His face was plastered on magazine covers and digital billboards across the city. The self-made titan of Sterling innovations. A man who had disrupted the tech world with a blend of brutal genius and even more brutal ambition. He was handsome in a severe way, with sharp cheekbones, piercing grey eyes, and dark hair meticulously styled to look effortlessly windswept. He radiated an aura of impatience, as if the rest of the world was operating on a delay he couldn't afford. With him was his fiancée, Victoria Davenport, the daughter of an old-money real estate dynasty. She was everything Celestine was not: poised blonde and adorned in diamonds that glittered with cold ancestral light. She sipped her champagne and laughed a laugh that never quite reached her eyes. Celestine approached the table with a heavy bottle of Chateau Margaux, a wine that cost more than her monthly rent. Her mind was 1,000,000 miles away, calculating the copay for her father's next round of physical therapy, wondering if she could pick up an extra shift on Thursday. That momentary distraction was all it took. A busboy, young and nervous, pivoted too quickly behind her. Their shoulders brushed a minor collision in the grand scheme of things. But the angle was disastrous. Celestine's hand, steady for thousands of hours of service, faltered. The neck of the bottle tipped, and a splash of deep blood-red wine arched through the air, landing directly on the pristine white shirt and grey silk tie of Sebastian Sterling. The world stopped. The hushed chatter of the restaurant died instantly. Every eye swiveled to table 12. The silence was a physical thing, heavy and suffocating. Victoria Davenport gasped, a hand flying to her mouth in performative shock. "Oh my God!" Celestine felt the blood drain from her face. "Mr. Sterling, I am so incredibly sorry," she began, her voice trembling slightly as she reached for a napkin. Sebastian looked down at the crimson stain spreading across his chest like a fatal wound. He didn't move. He simply stared at it for a long, terrible moment. Then very slowly, he lifted his gaze to Celestine. His eyes were not angry. They were worse. They were cold, analytical, and filled with a profound, dismissive contempt. "Are you," he asked, his voice dangerously soft, "are you sorry for your incompetence, or just for the fact that you've likely just ended your employment?" "It was an accident," Celestine whispered, her cheeks burning with shame. "The busboy, do not deflect blame." He cut her off, his voice rising just enough to carry. "A professional anticipates their surroundings. This shirt is custom-made. This tie is from Milan. Their value exceeds your annual salary. But the true cost is the disruption to my evening, an evening for which I am paying a small fortune." He stood up, dabbing at the stain with a napkin in a way that only made it worse. His friends, a pack of sycophantic junior partners and investors, watched with a mixture of pity for her and admiration for his display of power. "Please, sir." The restaurant manager, a flustered man named Mr. Dubois, scurried over. "The meal is on the house, of course. We will cover all dry cleaning expenses, all of them." Sebastian waved a dismissive hand, never taking his eyes off Celestine. She stood frozen, the heavy wine bottle still in her hand, feeling smaller and more insignificant than she ever had in her life. This was the nadir, the absolute bottom. The years of sacrifice, of swallowing her pride to pay for her father's care. All of it had led to this moment of public crucifixion over a spilled drink. "It's not about the money, Dubois," Sebastian said, a cruel smirk beginning to form on his lips. "It's about the principle. It's about standards." He looked at Celestine from her worn-out black shoes to the stray wisp of dark hair that had escaped her tight bun. He saw a nobody, a clumsy, forgettable waitress in a city full of them. And in that moment, fueled by arrogance and the rapt attention of the room, he decided to turn her humiliation into his evening's entertainment. "You know," he said, his voice now theatrical, "I'm in a generous mood. I'm willing to overlook this catastrophic failure of motor skills on one condition." Every person in the room leaned in. Celestine just wanted the floor to swallow her whole. She could feel the stares, the whispers, the judgment. Sebastian's eyes drifted to the small, polished wooden square in the corner of the restaurant, a makeshift dance floor where a jazz trio was playing a quiet, melancholic tune. A wicked, brilliant idea sparked in his mind. It was perfect. It was condescending. It was utterly unforgettable. He turned back to Celestine, his smirk widening into a predatory grin. "I'm sure you're a woman of many hidden talents. Let's see one of them." Celestine just stared, confused and terrified. "Sir." "Don't be shy," he purred, the mockery dripping from every syllable. "A little performance, a little dance for our supper. What do you say?" He was toying with her, and everyone knew it. He was and she was the mouse he had cornered, and he was determined to enjoy the kill. The jazz trio, sensing a shift in the room's atmosphere, trailed off into a confused silence. The only sound was the faint hum of the air conditioning and the frantic beating of Celestine's own heart. Sebastian Sterling circled her slowly like a shark, inspecting its prey. "A dance," he repeated, savoring the words. "A simple dance, to prove you're more than just a pair of hands that can't hold a wine bottle." Victoria Davenport let out a little titter of laughter, which was echoed by the men at their table. "Oh, Sebastian, you're dreadful," she said, though her eyes shone with cruel amusement. Mr. Dubois looked like he was about to have an aneurysm. "Mr. Sterling, please, this is highly unorthodox. The young lady is being given a chance to redeem herself." Sebastian cut in smoothly. his gaze locked on Celestine. A chance most people in her position only dream of. The undivided attention of everyone in this room. Celestine's throat was dry. She wanted to say no. She wanted to throw the wine bottle at his perfectly sculpted head, tear off her apron, and walk out with her head held high. But the image of her father flashed in her mind, his quiet strength, the way his medical bills piled up on the kitchen table, the hope in his eyes that she'd tried so hard not to extinguish. She needed this job. She couldn't afford a grand gesture of defiance. Her pride had been a luxury she'd surrendered long ago. I don't dance, sir. She mumbled the lie, tasting like ash in her mouth. Sebastian laughed, a sharp, barking sound devoid of humor. Oh, I'm sure you can manage a little shuffle. Everyone can. He gestured to the dance floor. But let's not make it too easy. His eyes scanned the room, and a glint of inspiration or perhaps malevolence lit them up. He walked over to the jazz trio's abandoned speaker, pulled out his phone, and connected it to the Bluetooth system with the ease of a man who owned the world and all the technology in it. He scrolled for a moment, a thoughtful, predatory look on his face. Then he found what he was looking for. The opening notes that filled the silent restaurant were unmistakable. Not the gentle swing of the jazz trio, but the dramatic, heart-wrenching sob of a bandoneon. It was the sound of Buenos Aires, of late-night milongas, of passion and despair. It was tango, and not just any tango. It was La Comparsita, in its most complex and dramatic orchestral arrangement. The tango of tangos. A dance that professionals spent a lifetime attempting to master. Celestine froze. The music was a ghost, a phantom limb she hadn't felt in years. Each note was a memory, a scar. The scent of her partner's cologne, the feel of the hardwood floor beneath her worn tango shoes, the weight of a gold medal around her neck, the crushing disappointment of a dream destroyed. It all came rushing back, a tidal wave of pain and longing. Sebastian walked back to her, his phone held aloft like a scepter. His voice was a triumphant, mocking roar that filled the cavernous room. There, he declared, a proper challenge. The tango, a dance of passion, precision, and control. Qualities you seem to be lacking. He leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that was still audible to the nearest tables. I'll tell you what. I'll make you a proposition, a truly once-in-a-lifetime offer. He straightened up, ensuring he had everyone's attention. He was a showman, a ringmaster in his own private circus of cruelty. Forget the dry cleaning bill. Forget your job, he announced grandly. You dance this tango right here, right now, and you dance it perfectly. And I'll do more than forgive you. He paused for dramatic effect, a wolfish grin spreading across his face. I'll marry you. The room erupted, not in gasps of shock, but in peals of laughter. It was the most absurd, most insulting, most theatrical proposition imaginable. The billionaire and the waitress. A fairy tale twisted into a public mockery. Victoria laughed, the hardest dabbing at her eyes, as if he'd just told the cleverest joke in the world. Marry me. Celestine finally found her voice, a whisper of disbelief. A figure of speech, of course, Sebastian said, with a condescending wink to his friends. A grand prize for a grand performance. But let's be realistic. There is no one in this city, let alone this room, let alone in that uniform, who could do justice to that music. It's an impossible task. He crossed his arms, the picture of smug satisfaction. The challenge was laid. The humiliation was complete. He expected her to crumble, to burst into tears and flee the room, providing the perfect end to his little power play. He had boxed her in, stripped her of her dignity, and made her the punchline of a joke she would never forget. For a long moment, Celestine stood motionless. The music swirled around her, a lament of strings and the rhythmic pulse of the piano. The laughter of the crowd echoed in her ears. She looked at Sebastian Sterling's mocking face, at Victoria's smug superiority, at the sea of expectant eyes, all waiting for her to break. Something inside her, a pilot light she thought had been extinguished years ago, flickered. It grew into a small, hot flame. It wasn't pride she felt, not anymore. It was rage. A pure, cold, clarifying rage. He thought this music was his weapon to humiliate her. He had no idea it was her sword and shield. He thought he was the ringmaster, but he had just walked into her arena. She looked directly into Sebastian's cold grey eyes. The fear and shame in her own had vanished, replaced by an intensity that made him momentarily falter. Slowly, deliberately, she began to untie the strings of her apron. "Fine," she said, her voice no longer a whisper, but clear and steady, cutting through the lingering laughter. She folded the apron neatly and placed it on a nearby tray. Then she kicked off her sensible, comfortable work shoes. The soft thud they made on the carpet was like a declaration. She stood before him in her simple black dress and stockinged feet. The posture of the weary waitress was gone. Her shoulders went back, her spine straightened, her chin lifted. In the space of 10 seconds, Celestine Rossi vanished, and someone else, someone formidable and terrifyingly alive, took her place. "You want a tango?" she said, her voice now laced with ice. "You'll get a tango, but you're going to be my partner." Sebastian's smirk wavered, replaced by a flicker of genuine surprise. This was not part of the script. It's a partner dance," she stated, not asked. She held out a hand, her gesture an undeniable command. "Unless you're afraid." The entire restaurant held its breath. The challenge had been thrown back. The mouse was roaring at the lion. To refuse now would be to admit defeat, to show weakness in front of the very people he sought to impress. Trapped by his own hubris, Sebastian Sterling had no choice. With a look of stunned disbelief, he took her hand. The moment his fingers touched hers, a jolt like an electric current passed between them. Her hand was not the soft, timid thing he expected. It was strong, confident, and impossibly sure. Celestine pulled him not gently toward the polished wooden floor. She turned to the band leader. "Restart the track," she commanded, "from the top." The first mournful notes of La Comparsita filled the room again. But this time the silence wasn't born of shock. It was electric with anticipation. As Celestine led Sebastian to the center of the floor, a transformation occurred that was so profound it seemed like a trick of the light. The slouch of the waitress, born from hours of fatigue, vanished. Her spine became a rod of steel, her shoulders set in a posture of regal command. She lifted her chin, and the guarded, weary look in her eyes was replaced by a smoldering fire. The simple black work dress no longer looked like a uniform. It looked like a deliberate, minimalist costume, accentuating the clean, powerful lines of her body. Sebastian, accustomed to leading in every aspect of his life, found the dynamic instantly and shockingly reversed. Her grip on his hand and her hand on his back were not suggestions. They were instructions, written in a language his body understood, before his mind could process it. He was a competent social dancer, taught the requisite steps for charity balls and high society functions. He knew how to lead a waltz, how to navigate a foxtrot. He knew nothing of this. This was not a dance. It was a declaration of war. For the opening bars, she held them in the abrazo, the traditional tango embrace, but hers was different. It was firm, dominant. She held his gaze, and in her dark eyes, he saw not a waitress, but a predator. He saw a story he couldn't begin to read. Then she moved. It began with the caminata, the tango walk. But her walk was not a simple step. It was a panther's prowl, her feet brushing the floor with a deadly grace, her hips swaying with a controlled hypnotic rhythm. She guided him backward, forcing him to follow her lead, his mind reeling. He had intended to embarrass her. Instead, he was a puppet, and she was the master pulling his strings. As the music swelled, her movements grew more complex. She executed a flawless ocho, her legs scissoring through the air with a speed and precision that defied belief. Her body was a blur of controlled energy, each movement flowing seamlessly into the next. She wasn't just performing steps. She was interpreting the music, embodying the soul of the tango, its passion, its melancholy, its fierce, defiant pride. The crowd was mesmerized. The whispers had stopped. The smirks had been wiped from every face, replaced by slack-jawed awe. Victoria Davenport's smile was frozen, a brittle mask of disbelief. This was not possible. The clumsy girl who had spilled wine was dancing with the skill of a world-class professional. Celestine pulled Sebastian into a series of giros, spinning him around her as she remained the unshakable axis of their shared world. He struggled to keep up his social dancing skills, utterly inadequate for the storm he had unleashed. She was the one leading her subtle shifts in weight and pressure, communicating her intent a fraction of a second before she moved. She was 10 steps ahead of him, anticipating his every clumsy reaction and incorporating it into her choreography. At one point, in a breathtaking display of audacity, she dipped him. It was a shocking reversal of roles, a move of such dominance that a collective gasp rippled through the restaurant. She held him there, suspended inches from the floor. For a heart-stopping second, her leg wrapped around his in a perfect gancho. She stared down at him, and in that moment, he felt utterly powerless. He saw the culmination of thousands of hours of practice, of sweat, of tears, of a life he couldn't possibly comprehend. She was telling him without words, "You have no idea who I am." He was no longer Sebastian Sterling, the tech mogul. He was just a man completely out of his depth, held captive by a force of nature disguised as a waitress. He felt the heat of her body, smelled the faint scent of soap and starch, and saw the raw, untamed passion burning in her eyes. It was terrifying. It was exhilarating. For the climax of the song, she broke their embrace, giving herself space. The floor became her stage. She performed a series of solo footwork combinations, her feet a blur of staccato taps and elegant sweeps, lapisboleo barrida. It was a language of its own, a story of a broken heart and an unbreakable spirit. The audience was no longer watching a dance. They were witnessing a soul laid bare. For the final crashing chord of the music, she launched herself back toward him. He braced himself, but instead of a collision, she melted into his arms, finishing in a dramatic pose. Her back arched her head, thrown back, one hand pressed against her heart. Her chest heaved with exertion, and her eyes glittering with unshed tears and fiery defiance were locked on his. For 3 eternal seconds, the restaurant was utterly silent. The world seemed to hold its breath. Then a single person began to clap. Then another. And another. Within moments, the entire room, from the busboys hiding in the kitchen doorway to the wealthiest patrons, was on its feet, erupting in a deafening roar of applause and shouts of "Brava!" It was an ovation the Serafina had never seen. It wasn't polite society applause. It was thunderous, visceral, and raw. Sebastian stood, frozen, his arms still around Celestine, his mind a complete blank. His heart was hammering against his ribs, a frantic rhythm that had nothing to do with exertion and everything to do with the woman in his arms. The humiliation he had planned had turned into his own public humbling. He had mocked a master, challenged a queen in her own court, and he had been utterly, devastatingly defeated. Celestine gently extricated herself from his grasp. She ignored the applause, the shocked faces, the standing ovation. She gave one last, long look at Sebastian Sterling, a look that held a universe of meaning, contempt, triumph, pity, and a profound, heartbreaking sadness. Then, without a word, she turned her back on him on table 12, on the entourage stunned restaurant. She walked past the gawking Mr. Dubois, retrieved her worn shoes, and headed for the staff exit, never once looking back. She didn't need their applause. She didn't need his ridiculous proposal. She had taken back the only thing that mattered. She had taken back herself. The thunderous applause slowly faded as Celestine disappeared through the swinging kitchen doors, leaving a vacuum in the center of the room. The patrons slowly returned to their seats, but the atmosphere of quiet elegance was shattered. The air buzzed with excited, incredulous chatter. Everyone was talking about the waitress, the Tango waitress. Sebastian Sterling remained standing on the dance floor, the wine stain on his shirt a forgotten detail. He felt as though he'd been struck by lightning. The ghost of her touch, the intensity of her gaze, the sheer raw power of her performance, it replayed in his mind on a loop. Who was she? How was this possible? Sebastian, for God's sake, come and sit down. Everyone is staring. Victoria's voice was a sharp, icy hiss that cut through his daze. He looked over at her. Her face was a mask of fury. The amusement was gone, replaced by a deep personal humiliation. She hadn't been entertained. She had been upstaged. A nobody waitress had stolen the spotlight at her table with her fiancé and had become the star of an evening that was supposed to be about them. "Did you see that?" one of his associates, a man named Richard, said with a low whistle. "Where did she learn to dance like that?" "She must be a professional," another chimed in. "Some sort of performance artist." Sebastian ignored them. He walked back to the table, his movements stiff and robotic. He felt exposed, foolish. His clever, cruel game had blown up in his face in the most public way imaginable. He had tried to assert his power and had only succeeded in revealing hers. "That was quite a spectacle," Victoria said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "I hope you're satisfied." Sebastian started, but he had no words. Satisfied. He was disoriented, shaken, and inexplicably intrigued. The spell was broken by the frantic tapping of a phone screen at a nearby table. A woman was excitedly showing her friend a video. "I got the whole thing. I'm posting it right now. #Tango Waitress, #Serafina, Showdown." A knot of dread tightened in Sebastian's stomach. By the time he and his silent, furious fiancée were in their car, his phone was already buzzing incessantly. A news alert from a city gossip blog popped up. "Mysterious waitress stuns elite crowd with world-class tango at the Serafina." He clicked on it. The video was shaky, filmed from a table across the room, but it was unmistakably clear. The quality was poor, but the quality of the dancing was undeniable. It captured everything: his mocking challenge, her quiet acceptance, and the breathtaking 3-minute performance that had left everyone speechless. The comments were already flooding in. OMG, who is she? She's incredible. That arrogant jerk in the suit is Sebastian Sterling. He deserved that. She didn't just dance. She owned him. I hope she sues him for harassment. That "marry you" comment was disgusting. #find the Tango Waitress. The hashtag was spreading like wildfire. "This is a disaster," Victoria said from the other side of the car, her arms crossed tightly. "You made a complete fool of yourself, Sebastian, and of me." "I didn't know," he said, his voice flat. It was a weak defense, and he knew it. "That's the point. You never know. You just charge ahead assuming everyone is beneath you, that you can play with people's lives for your own amusement." She seethed. "Well, your little game just went viral. The board of my father's charity is meeting tomorrow. What do you think they'll be discussing over coffee?" Sebastian didn't answer. He was watching the video again, zooming in on Celestine's face. In the pixelated image, he could see the flicker of emotions, the initial pain, the hardening resolve, the fiery passion. He had looked at her and seen a disposable object. He had been spectacularly, catastrophically wrong. The next morning, it was a full-blown media storm. The video had millions of views. It was on every morning news show, every entertainment blog. The Tango Waitress was the #1 trending topic in the country. Reporters were camped outside the Serafina, trying to get a comment from the now-famous staff. Dubois, looking overwhelmed, simply stated that the employee had quit the previous night and left no forwarding information. At the headquarters of Sterling Innovations, Sebastian's PR team was in full crisis mode. "We need to get ahead of this, Seb," said David Chen, his chief operating officer, and one of his few real friends. "The narrative right now is billionaire bully gets rightfully humbled. It's not a good look. It makes you look cruel and out of touch." "I was cruel," Sebastian admitted, staring out his panoramic office window at the city below. He hadn't slept. "I was an arrogant ass." David raised an eyebrow. An admission of fault from Sebastian was rarer than a solar eclipse. "Okay, good start. So what do we do?" "We issue an apology. We say the proposal was a poor attempt at humor. We make a large donation to a charity for aspiring artists." "No," Sebastian said, turning from the window. "That's not enough. That's just damage control. That's plastic." "What are you thinking?" David asked, wary. "I need to find her," Sebastian said, a new unfamiliar determination in his voice. "I need to apologize to her. In person." "Are you crazy? Leave it alone. The story will die down in a few days," David argued. "Going after her will only make it worse. It'll look like you're harassing her again, trying to buy her silence." "I don't care how it looks," Sebastian insisted. "This isn't about P anymore. Did you watch the video, David? I mean, really watch it?" "That wasn't just a dance. That was something else. No one learns to dance like that, taking a few classes on the weekend. That's a lifetime of dedication. And she was serving tables at the Serafina. Why?" The question hung in the air. It was the question that had been gnawing at him all night. The disconnect was too vast. The talent was too immense to be hidden under a waitress's apron by choice. He had set out to expose a weakness, and had instead stumbled upon a profound mystery. And Sebastian Sterling, a man who had built his empire on solving complex problems and uncovering patterns others couldn't see, was now completely and utterly obsessed. "I don't just need to apologize," he said more to himself than to David. "I need to understand." He picked up his phone and buzzed his assistant. "Get me Nicholas Frost on the line, the private investigator. Tell him to clear his schedule. I have a job for him. I want him to find a ghost." While Sebastian Sterling was leveraging his immense resources to pierce the veil of her anonymity, Celestine Rossi was hiding. She'd fled her tiny apartment, taking refuge in the slightly larger, infinitely more cluttered apartment of her best friend and former co-worker, Chloe. Chloe's living room was a fortress of drawn blinds and silenced phones. The television was off, but the story was unavoidable. Every time they dared to check online, Celestine's face, captured in a grainy screenshot from the viral video, stared back at them. "You are officially more famous than that cat who plays the piano," Chloe announced, scrolling through her phone with a morbid fascination. "They're calling you the Tango Terminatrix. The comments are wild. 90% are on your side, calling you a hero. The other 10% are just proposals from strangers who are apparently into being publicly dominated." Celestine, curled on the sofa in a borrowed sweatshirt, managed a weak smile. "I don't feel like a hero. I feel like I just detonated my entire life." "You didn't detonate it. You liberated it," Chloe corrected. "You quit that soul-crushing job in the most epic way possible. You should be proud." "I'm terrified, Chloe," Celestine confessed, her voice barely a whisper. "I have no job. My father's next treatment is in 3 weeks, and now my face is everywhere. What if a potential employer sees that they'll think I'm a troublemaker? Or they'll think you're a superstar who deserves better than serving soup to sociopaths," Chloe countered fiercely. "Look, there are already offers. This dance studio in Chelsea wants to offer you a position as their lead instructor. A theatre company in the village wants to audition you for their new show. A cruise line wants you to be their headline performer. Izzy, this is a chance, the chance you thought you'd lost." Celestine flinched at the word chance. It brought back too many memories. The scent of rosin, the feel of a perfectly balanced dance shoe, the echo of applause in a real theatre, and the face of her partner, the other half of her soul on the dance floor. Matteo. As if summoned by the thought, Chloe's phone buzzed with a new message notification. She looked at it, and her expression soured. "Speak of the devil," she muttered. "What is it?" Celestine asked. "It's him, Matteo Vargas," Chloe said, turning the phone to show Celestine the screen. It was a message request on a social media platform. The message read, "Celestine mi estrella. I saw the video. The world saw the video. That fire, it never went out. I knew it. We need to talk. I'm back in New York. Call me." Celestine felt a cold dread wash over her. Matteo, her partner since they were children. They had been a unit, a single entity destined for greatness. They had won junior championships, national titles. They were Vargas and Rossi, the rising stars of the international tango circuit. He was the one who had pushed her, perfected her, and ultimately broken her. The tragedy hadn't just been her father's sudden, devastating illness. It had been Matteo's reaction to it. When she'd told him she needed to step back to take time off from competing to care for her family and work to pay the bills, he had been furious. He'd called her weak, said she was throwing away their dream. His dream. He hadn't offered support. He'd delivered an ultimatum. The dance or her family. When she chose her family, he left. He took a new partner and moved to Europe without so much as a goodbye, leaving her to face her world, crumbling alone. His abandonment had been a deeper cut than any financial hardship. "Don't you dare answer him," Chloe warned, seeing the conflicted look on Celestine's face. "He's an opportunist, is he? He saw you go viral, and now he's slithering back, thinking he can ride your coattails." "He was my partner for 15 years. Celestine said softly. "It's not that simple." "It is that simple," Chloe insisted. "He left you when you needed him most. Sebastian Sterling might be a world-class jerk, but at least he's a stranger. Matteo knew you, and he still walked away." Meanwhile, in his sterile, glass-walled office, Sebastian was reading the preliminary report from his investigator, Nicholas Frost. Frost was the best in the business. Discreet, thorough, and frighteningly efficient. Subject: Celestine Maria Rossi. Age 28. Last known address: Walk-up apartment, Queens. Employment history: Waitress. The Serafina, 18 months. Prior to that, various service industry jobs. Family: Lorenzo Rossi. Father, 62. Former master carpenter. Suffered a debilitating stroke 3 years ago. Currently in long-term care at the Northwood Rehabilitation Center. Medical expenses: substantial insurance coverage minimal. Elena Rossi. Mother, deceased. Sebastian paused, a knot forming in his stomach. The mystery of why she was a waitress was beginning to resolve itself into a sad, simple story of financial desperation. But it was the next section that made him lean forward. Education/training. Full scholarship recipient, Astor Academy of the Performing Arts, AAPA. Dance. Tmeja. Specialized in Argentinian tango. Attended from age 10 to 22. Considered a prodigy. Competitive history. Paired with Matteo Vargas. 3x U.S. National Junior Tango Champion. 2x North American Professional Exhibition Champion, Gold Medalist 2018 World Tango. Championships Buenos Aires show Tango division attached was a photo. It showed a younger Celestine, maybe 21 or 22, standing on a podium. Her face was radiant, flushed with victory. A heavy gold medal hung around her neck. Her arm was around a handsome, smirking young man, Matteo Vargas. They looked invincible. Note: Subject Rossi and partner Vargas abruptly dissolved their partnership 3 years ago, shortly after her father's medical incident. Vargas relocated to Europe with a new partner. Rossi dropped off the professional dance circuit entirely. No public performances on record until the incident at the Serafina. Sebastian stared at the photo. The brilliant, joyful woman on that podium and the haunted, weary waitress he had tormented were the same person. The pieces clicked into place, forming a picture not of a mystery, but of a tragedy. He had mocked a champion who had sacrificed her crown for her family. He had belittled a woman who had given up everything, and his careless cruelty had dragged her back into a spotlight she had clearly fled for a reason. His guilt, which had been a nagging discomfort, now became a crushing weight. His obsession with finding her was no longer about curiosity. It was about atonement. He picked up the file and looked at the address for the Northwood Rehabilitation Center. An idea began to form in his mind, an idea that went beyond a simple apology. An idea that was risky, that could be seen as intrusive, but that felt like the only right thing to do. He couldn't undo the humiliation he had caused, but maybe, just maybe, he could help restore the life she had been forced to leave behind. The Northwood Rehabilitation Center was a world away from the gleaming towers of Manhattan. It was a clean, quiet place, but it smelled of disinfectant and quiet desperation. Sebastian Sterling, dressed down in jeans and a simple grey sweater, felt profoundly out of place. He wasn't here as a mogul or a public figure. He was here as a man carrying a heavy debt of conscience. He had arranged the meeting through the center's administrator under the guise of being a potential philanthropic donor. In the small, sunlit recreation room, he found Lorenzo Rossi, sitting in a wheelchair, painstakingly trying to carve a small piece of wood with a specially adapted tool. He was a man with a kind, tired face and the powerful, gnarled hands of a craftsman, one of which was now mostly immobile. "Mr. Rossi," Sebastian began, his voice softer than usual. Lorenzo looked up, his eyes sharp and intelligent, despite his physical limitations. "You are the man from the television," he said, his speech slow but clear. "The one who made my Bella dance." Sebastian flinched. He hadn't expected to be recognized. "Yes, my name is Sebastian Sterling. I came here to—" "I know why you are here," Lorenzo interrupted. He set down his carving. "You feel guilty. You want to give us money to make it go away." The bluntness of the statement disarmed Sebastian completely. He had come with a carefully prepared speech, an offer to cover all of Lorenzo's past, present, and future medical expenses anonymously, if preferred. But Lorenzo had cut right through the pretense. "Yes," Sebastian admitted honestly. "I do feel guilty. What I did was inexcusable. And yes, I want to help. Your daughter, she shouldn't have to carry this burden." Lorenzo looked at his hands. "The burden is not the bills, Mr. Sterling. The burden is seeing the light go out of her eyes. For 3 years she has not been my Bella. She has been a ghost. She gave up her life, her soul, the dance for me. Every dollar she earns feels like a piece of her dream she has sold." He finally met Sebastian's gaze, and his eyes were filled with a father's fierce, heart-breaking love. "When I saw that video, for 3 minutes my Bella came back. The fire was there. You were cruel to her, yes, but you also woke her up. A strange gift from a terrible man." The words hit Sebastian harder than any insult. A terrible man. "I want to fix what I broke," Sebastian said, his voice thick with an emotion he rarely allowed himself to feel. "Please, let me do this. Not for my conscience. For her." He slid an envelope across the table. It wasn't a check. It was a detailed proposal from the best neurological and physical therapy specialists in the country, a fully funded multi-year treatment plan, and a deed transferring ownership of a small, accessible house near the facility to the Rossi family, free and clear. It was a comprehensive, life-altering solution, not a simple payoff. Lorenzo looked at the papers, his eyes widening slightly. He was silent for a long time. "This is not money," he said finally. "This is a future." He looked up at Sebastian. "She will not accept this from you. Her pride is all she has left." "Then don't tell her it's from me," Sebastian pleaded. "Tell her it's a new grant program, an anonymous benefactor. Anything. Just let her be free to dance again." At that exact moment across town, Celestine was facing a ghost of her own. She had agreed to meet Matteo against Chloe's advice in a neutral location, a small coffee shop in her neighborhood. He looked different, older, harder. The easy charm had been replaced by a slick European polish. "Celestine," he said, his voice a smooth baritone she had once found intoxicating. "You look tired." "I've been working, Matteo," she replied coolly. "Exactly. Working, serving coffee. It's a crime," he said, leaning forward. "I saw the video. That passion. It's still there. It's ours. We were destined for greatness, you and I. I was a fool to leave." "You didn't leave. You abandoned me," she corrected him, her voice steely. "I was angry." "Hurt you gave up on us," he argued, "but this is our second chance. A gift from the gods of social media. Vargas and Rossi can be a global brand now. That idiot billionaire did us a favor. We can tour, teach judge competitions. We can have it all back, mi estrella. He reached across the table to take her hand, but she pulled it away. For years she had nursed the wound of his departure, sometimes even blaming herself. But seeing him now so eager to capitalize on her viral moment, she saw him clearly for the first time. He didn't love the dance. He loved the glory. He didn't miss her. He missed her talent. There is no us, Matteo, she said, her voice firm. That partnership is dead. You killed it when you walked away from me and my family. Don't be a fool, Celestine. He hissed, his charm evaporating. This is your only way back. No one else will have you. You've been out of the game for too long. You need me. No, she said, standing up, the realization hitting her with the force of a physical blow. I don't. I never did. She walked out of the coffee shop, leaving him stunned and furious. She had faced her past and had not flinched. For the first time in 3 years, she felt a flicker of her old self returning, not because of a dance, but because of a choice she had made for herself. Her liberation, however, was about to be complicated. As she returned to Chloe's apartment, her phone rang. It was Victoria Davenport. Celestine Rossi. The voice was cold and clipped. I think you and I need to have a conversation. It seems you've made quite an impression on my fiancé. Meet me at the plaza in an hour. Don't be late. The line went dead. Sebastian, meanwhile, was also facing an ultimatum. He returned to his penthouse to find Victoria waiting for him, her face like a thundercloud. My father called me, she said, her voice dangerously calm. He heard from the board of the Northwood Center that a Mr. Sterling was making inquiries. You went to see that waitress's father. It wasn't a question. Victoria, you had to what? Involve yourself further in this disgusting, humiliating mess, she exploded. It's all anyone is talking about. I have become a laughing stock. The woman whose fiancé was so captivated by a waitress's tango, he's now chasing her family around. This has nothing to do with you, Sebastian said flatly. This is about something I did. Something I'm trying to make right. Make right? She laughed, a brittle, ugly sound. Oh, Sebastian, you are so naive sometimes. You don't make things right with people like that. You write a check and you move on. You've lost your perspective. She walked toward him, her eyes hard as diamonds. So I'm going to make this very simple for you. You will cease all contact with this woman and her family. You will let your PR team handle it. You will go back to being the man I agreed to marry. All this engagement and the merger of the Sterling and Davenport empires that comes with it is over. Choose, her or me. Sebastian looked at her perfect hair, her flawless makeup, her cold, calculating eyes. He saw the world he had fought so hard to conquer, the acceptance he had craved. And then he thought of Celestine's fiery dance and her father's quiet dignity. He thought of the sacrifice, the passion, the authenticity. One world was built on power and appearances. The other was built on something real. His choice, he realized with shocking clarity, had already been made. The Palm Court at the Plaza Hotel was a monument to gilded elegance, a place designed to make anyone in a borrowed sweatshirt feel small. Celestine walked in her head held high. After her encounters with Matteo and her father's indirect awakening, her fear had been replaced by a quiet, resolute strength. Victoria was sitting at a secluded table, a picture of icy perfection. She didn't offer a greeting, simply gesturing to the chair opposite her. Thank you for coming. Victoria began, her tone suggesting it was a royal summons. I'll be direct. You've become an inconvenience. I didn't ask for any of this, Celestine replied calmly. And yet here we are. Victoria continued, stirring a cup of tea she had no intention of drinking. Sebastian is impressionable. He has this misguided notion that he needs to atone for his behavior. He's sentimental, a flaw I am trying to correct. He seems to have developed a fixation on you. She slid a checkbook and a pen across the table. So let's solve this. Write a number on this check. Any number. 6 figures, 7. Whatever it takes for you to disappear. Take a long vacation. Move to a new city. Go back to whatever life you had before you decided to ruin my evening. Celestine looked at the blank check, then back at Victoria's perfectly composed face. A week ago, a check like that would have been the answer to all her prayers. It would have meant her father's care, a life without constant crushing financial anxiety. But now it felt like an insult. Lorenzo's words echoed in her head. The burden is not the bills. Slowly, Celestine pushed the checkbook back across the table. My dignity isn't for sale, Miss Davenport, she said, her voice low but unwavering. And for the record, your fiancé's behavior ruined my life long before it ruined your evening. Victoria's composure finally cracked. You self-righteous little... I'm leaving, Celestine said, standing up. I have nothing more to say to you. As she turned to leave, she nearly collided with Sebastian, who had just entered the Palm Court, his face grim. He had come looking for Victoria to end their engagement, only to find her attempting to buy Celestine's silence. Victoria, that's enough, he said, his voice sharp with command. His eyes found Celestine's, and for the first time she saw not arrogance or pity but genuine, profound remorse. Celestine, I am so sorry. For everything. Your apology is about 3 days and 1 million YouTube views too late, she said, though the anger in her voice was tempered by a weary sadness. I know, he said. Words are useless. That's why I went to see your father. Celestine's blood ran cold. You what? How dare you bring him into this? I had to, Sebastian insisted, stepping closer. I had to understand, and I had to do something real, not just for me, for him, for you. Before she could protest further, Celestine's phone rang. It was the administrator from her father's care center, her voice bubbling with excitement. Celestine. You won't believe it. An anonymous arts foundation just awarded your father their first ever legacy grant. It covers everything, all his outstanding bills, a full intensive therapy program with the best specialists, and they've even arranged for a trust to cover his living expenses. He can finally leave Northwood. He's free. Celestine. You're free. Celestine listened, stunned into silence. The phone pressed hard against her ear. She looked at Sebastian, understanding dawning on her face. It wasn't a payoff. It wasn't a bribe. It was a key to the cage she had been in for 3 long years. Tears welled in her eyes, not of sadness or anger, but of overwhelming, complicated relief. Victoria, seeing the entire exchange, stood up, her face a mask of cold fury. I see, she said icily to Sebastian. You've made your choice. You'd rather throw your fortune away on this charity case than build an empire with me. You are a fool, Sebastian. No, Sebastian said, his eyes never leaving Celestine's tear-streaked face. For the first time in a very long time, I'm not. The Victoria stormed out, leaving a trail of expensive perfume and shattered ambitions in her wake. An awkward, heavy silence fell between Celestine and Sebastian. The grand setting of the plaza seemed to fade away, leaving just the two of them. "You shouldn't have," Celestine whispered, finally finding her voice. "Yes, I should have," he countered gently. "It's the only thing I've done in the past week that I'm not ashamed of. I can't take back what I did, how I treated you. But I can give you back the time you sacrificed. I can give you back the chance to just be a dancer." He didn't ask for forgiveness. He didn't ask for a date. He didn't make another ridiculous proposal. He simply stood there, offering her a future with no strings attached. A few weeks later, Celestine stood in a vast, sun-drenched dance studio. She wasn't an instructor. She was the owner. The Rossi Foundation for the Performing Arts, funded by an anonymous tech grant, had been established to provide scholarships and opportunities for young dancers from low-income families. Her father, now in a state-of-the-art outpatient program, spent his afternoons in a workshop attached to the studio carving beautiful wooden trophies for the foundation's future competitions. The door opened, and Sebastian walked in, looking hesitant. He hadn't contacted her since that day at the plaza, giving her space. "The place looks amazing," he said quietly. "Thank you. For all of it," she replied, her sincerity clear. "I don't know how to repay you." "I do," he said, a hopeful, nervous energy about him. "Don't repay me. Teach me." She looked at him confused. "Teach you what? How to dance?" He said, his gaze direct and stripped of all its former arrogance. "Properly, this time. Not the showpiece. Not the performance. I don't want to learn the tango you dance for an audience. I want to learn the one you dance for yourself. I want to learn your language." It was the most honest, humble thing he had ever said. It wasn't a challenge or a proposition. It was a request for connection. Celestine looked at this man, who had in the course of a few weeks been her tormentor, her unwilling partner, and her unlikely liberator. She saw the change in him, the hard edges softened by a newfound humility. A slow smile spread across her face. She walked to the sound system and put on a piece of music. It wasn't the fiery, dramatic La Comparsita. It was a slow, melodic tango, full of quiet longing and the promise of a new beginning. She turned and held out her hand. "The first lesson is free," she said, "but this time, Mr. Sterling, you follow my lead." He took her hand, and as they stepped onto the polished floor, it wasn't a battle or a performance. It was a conversation, a quiet, unrehearsed duet between two people from different worlds, finding a new rhythm together. And so a story that began with a cruel taunt ended with a quiet lesson. It wasn't a fairy tale wedding, but something far more real, a partnership built not on a mocking proposal, but on a genuine plea for understanding. Sebastian and Celestine's journey shows us that true strength isn't about power or wealth, but about the courage to admit when you're wrong and the grace to forgive. It reminds us that dignity is not for sale, and that incredible talent can be found in the most unexpected places, just waiting for the right music to play. What did you think of Celestine's incredible comeback? Was Sebastian's grand gesture enough to atone for his actions? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. We read every single one. If you were moved by this story of redemption and unexpected connection, please hit that like button. Share it with someone who loves a powerful story, and be sure to subscribe to our channel for more tales that will touch your heart. Thank you for listening. What if your entire life's work, a legacy built over decades, could be wiped out with a single stroke of a pen, for billionaire philanthropist Alistair Finch. That nightmare was seconds away from becoming a reality. The deal on the table was worth a staggering $200 million, a revolutionary investment promising to change the world. The man across from him was a trusted friend. The documents were vetted, and the pen was in his hand. But in that gilded Manhattan restaurant, an unlikely hero was watching. A waitress, a young woman with nothing to her name but student debt, and a keen eye, saw what no one else did. And she was about to risk everything on 3 simple words. This is the incredible true story of how a quiet warning. Don't sign that unraveled a masterful deception and saved a fortune. The Gilded Quill was less a restaurant and more a sanctuary for the titans who shaped New York City. Tucked away on a quiet street in the Upper East Side, its existence was a secret whispered among the city's elite. There was no sign, only a single lacquered black door and a discreet doorman who recognized guests not by their reservations, but by the weight of their influence. Inside, the world fell away. Walls were lined with dark mahogany and original Rothko paintings. The lighting was a soft, honeyed glow from crystal decanters, and the air hummed with the low murmur of billion-dollar deals and discreet society gossip. Clara Russo knew this hum well. To her, it was the sound of her tuition payments, her rent, on a tiny Brooklyn walk-up, and the ever-present crushing weight of her late father's medical bills. At 24, she was a third-year law student at Columbia, and this job, with its astronomical tips from patrons who wouldn't notice a missing $1,000, was her lifeline. She moved through the room with a practiced invisibility, her steps silent on the plush Persian rugs, her focus absolute. She wasn't just a waitress. She was a ghost, a silent observer in a world she could see, but never touch. Tonight, her station included Booth 4, the most coveted and private alcove in the restaurant. It was currently occupied by Alistair Finch. Even someone like Clara, who paid little attention to the Forbes list, knew who he was. Finch wasn't a brash tech mogul or a cutthroat hedge fund manager. He was old money, a man whose family had helped build the city's very foundations. Now, in his late 60s, he had a gentle, almost academic air about him. His wealth was a tool for his true passion philanthropy. The Finch Foundation was a global force funding everything from pediatric cancer research to art restoration projects in war-torn countries. He was a widower, and those who knew him said he poured the love he had for his late wife Eleanor into his work. Across from him sat Julian Croft. Croft was everything Finch was not. He was sharp-tailored and radiated a magnetic, almost predatory energy. In his late 40s, with a sweep of silver at his temples and a smile that could disarm armies, Croft was the CEO of Viridian Dynamics. He was the man of the hour, the visionary who was going to solve the climate crisis. His proposal, the reason for this dinner, was a revolutionary technology involving heliculture, a proprietary method of cultivating algae in vertical bioreactors that could supposedly produce clean biofuel at a fraction of the cost of any existing method. It was a game changer, and he had chosen Alistair Finch to be his partner. Clara approached the table, her silver tray balanced perfectly. "Mr. Finch, your usual Macallan 25. She said, her voice a soft, respectful murmur as she placed the heavy crystal tumbler down. "Miss Croft, another. San Pellegrino." "Thank you, my dear," Alistair said with a warm, grandfatherly smile. His eyes, though tired, held a spark of genuine kindness. Julian Croft, however, barely glanced at her. His focus was locked on Alistair. "You see, Alistair, this isn't just about profit. This is about legacy. Eleanor would have loved this. It's a gift to the future, to our children's children." Clara felt a small, sharp pang of discomfort. The way he used the late Mrs. Finch's name felt rehearsed, calculated. She had served hundreds of people in this restaurant. She had learned to read the subtle tells, the slight tremor in a hand before a market crash, the flicker of an eye that betrayed a lie. With Julian Croft, the tells were almost non-existent. His performance was that polished, but his confidence felt brittle, like a thin veneer of ice over dark water. As she retreated, she overheard Alistair's reply. Eleanor was the true visionary, Julian. I'm merely the steward of her ideals. His voice was thick with a nostalgia that was both beautiful and, in this context, painfully vulnerable. Clara refilled water glasses at the adjacent table, her senses still tuned to Booth 4. Croft was laying out the final details. It was a $200 million investment, a massive sum even for Alistair Finch. It represented a significant portion of the foundation's liquid capital. But the projected returns were astronomical, and the humanitarian impact was immeasurable. The patents are secured, the preliminary facilities in Nevada are ready for expansion, and the science is sound. Croft said, his voice a smooth, persuasive symphony. All we need is your signature. He slid a thick, leather-bound portfolio across the table. From it, he produced a single multi-page document and a heavy, gold-plated fountain pen. The Mont Blanc. The deal closer. Clara had seen that pen sign away fortunes. Alistair opened the document, his reading glasses perched on his nose. But he wasn't really reading it. His gaze was distant. Clara recognized the look. He wasn't seeing the dense legal text. He was seeing a future powered by clean energy. A world saved a legacy worthy of his late wife. He was signing the idea, not the contract. Clara's stomach tightened. She was just a waitress. Her job was to be invisible, to anticipate needs before they were spoken. Refill a glass, clear a plate, deliver a check. Getting involved was not just discouraged. It was grounds for immediate dismissal. She had debts to pay, a degree to finish. She couldn't afford to lose this job. But as she watched Julian Croft's reassuring smile, a cold dread washed over her. It was the same smile she remembered from a man in a cheap suit who had convinced her father to invest his entire retirement savings into a guaranteed real estate venture just before he got sick. A venture that turned out to be a hole in the ground and a forged deed. That smile had cost her family everything. Alistair Finch picked up the pen. The soft light of the restaurant glinted off the golden nib. He uncapped it with a soft click that echoed in the silent booth, a sound of finality. Clara felt her heart hammer against her ribs. Her mind screamed. Say something. Do something. You're a law student. You know what happens to people who trust too much. But her feet felt cemented to the floor. This was Alistair Finch. He had teams of the best lawyers and accountants in the world. Who was she? A nobody. A ghost in a gilded cage. To interfere would be the height of arrogance and professional suicide. Alistair lowered the pen towards the signature line. The ink was about to flow. Every instinct in Clara's body was a blaring siren. The memory of her father's face, hollowed by illness and financial ruin, flashed in her mind. He had been a good man, a trusting man, just like Alistair Finch appeared to be. And he had been devoured by a shark who looked him in the eye and promised him the world. Alistair's hand was steady as it hovered over the paper. Julian Croft leaned back slightly, a portrait of relaxed success, but Clara noticed the minute tension in his jaw, the way his knuckles were white where he gripped the armrest of his chair. He was a predator, waiting for the trap to spring. Clara's training, her very nature, told her to turn away. But her education, the thousands of hours spent poring over contracts, studying torts, and learning the myriad ways the written word could be twisted into a weapon, screamed at her to look closer. An opportunity arose, a small mercy of fate. The couple at the neighboring table, a tech mogul and his wife, were leaving. It was Clara's duty to see them out and reset the table. This path would take her directly past booth 4. As she moved, she kept her eyes downcast. The picture of deference, but her senses were on high alert. Her approach was timed perfectly. Just as she was adjacent to the booth, Alistair paused, momentarily distracted by the departing couple's farewells. He had set the pen down beside the signature line to nod politely at his acquaintances. In that split second, the final page of the contract was angled perfectly in her line of sight. It wasn't a long look, maybe 2 seconds at most. But for a third-year law student who had spent the last month cramming for an exam on international contract law, it was enough. Her brain, conditioned to scan for anomalies, snagged on 2 separate jarring details. The first was the jurisdiction clause. It was a dense block of text, but the words that leaped out at her were Grand Cayman and arbitration. It was common for international corporations to register in tax havens like the Cayman Islands, but for a US-based green energy company with physical assets in Nevada, it was a glaring red flag. It made litigation a nightmare, moving any dispute out of the predictable and robust US legal system and into a secretive, corporate-friendly arbitration process thousands of miles away. It was a classic way to make a contract virtually unenforceable for the investor. The second detail was even more alarming. She caught a phrase in the indemnification section: held entirely harmless from any and all claims of operational non-performance, misrepresentation, or technological incapacity. Clara felt a jolt as if she'd touched a live wire. She had literally studied that exact type of clause last week. It was what her professor called the get-out-of-jail-free card. In essence, it stated that even if the entire technology was a sham, and the company failed to perform as promised, Viridian Dynamics and its executives could not be held financially or legally responsible. It was a clause no sane lawyer would ever let their client sign. It transferred all the risk, all of it, to the investor. The couple had left. The brief distraction was over. Alistair Finch picked up the heavy gold pen once more. He smiled at Julian, a final trusting nod. "To the future, Julian," he said, his voice filled with hope. "To the future, Alistair." Croft replied, his smile widening. It didn't reach his eyes. Clara was frozen, standing by the now empty table, a linen napkin clutched in her hand. Her mind was a whirlwind. "It's not your business. You'll be fired. You'll be blacklisted. How could you possibly explain this? Excuse me, Mr. Finch. I happened to glance at your $250 million contract while clearing a table, and I, a part-time waitress, have found some issues your legal team missed. It was absurd, impossible, and yet the image of her father's signature on that fraudulent property deed burned in her memory. A simple scrawl of a pen that had unraveled a lifetime of hard work. The same pen, the same trust, the same devastating potential was happening right in front of her. She could feel the echoes of her own family's tragedy in the quiet, expensive air of the Gilded Quill. Alistair inhaled a preparatory breath before the final act. The nib of the pen touched the paper. In that infinitesimal moment, Clara's choice was made. The fears for her job, her tuition, her future were consumed by a singular, overwhelming conviction. She could not stand by and watch it happen again. Not this time. She took a single decisive step forward, breaking the invisible barrier that separated staff from clientele. Her voice, when it came out, was not a shout, but a clear, sharp, and shockingly loud utterance in the hushed restaurant. "Mr. Finch," she said, her tone cutting through the ambient calm. "Forgive me." Alistair looked up, startled, his hand frozen in place. Julian Croft's head snapped towards her, his charming facade instantly vanishing, replaced by a flash of pure, cold fury. Clara's heart was a drum solo against her ribs, but her eyes were locked on Alistair Finch's. She took another breath and said the 3 words that would change everything. "Don't sign that." The silence that followed Clara's words was not the polite hush of a fine dining establishment. It was a fractured, deafening void. Every quiet conversation in the room seemed to falter. The clinking of silverware stopped. Even the distant clatter from the kitchen seemed to have ceased. For a moment, all of the Gilded Quill was a tableau frozen in shock with Clara at its epicenter. Alistair Finch stared at her, his expression a mixture of profound confusion and bewilderment. The pen remained poised over the paper, a millimeter of ink away from disaster. Julian Croft was the first to recover. The mask of charm slammed back into place, but his eyes were like chips of ice. "I beg your pardon," he said, his voice dangerously smooth, but with an underlying edge of steel. He directed a withering glare at Clara, a look that conveyed her insignificance with brutal efficiency. "This is a private conversation. Get back to your duties." The restaurant manager, a perpetually flustered man named Mr. Dubois, was already rushing towards the table, his face pale with horror. "Mr. Finch, Mr. Croft, my deepest apologies. I have no idea what's come over this young woman. Absolutely unacceptable. She will be dealt with immediately." Dubois grabbed Clara's arm, his grip surprisingly strong. "You're fired. Get your things and get out. Now." But Clara stood her ground. She ignored Dubois's grip and kept her gaze fixed on Alistair Finch. She had crossed the Rubicon. There was no turning back now. Her job was gone. All she had left was the reason she'd thrown it all away. "Mr. Finch," she said again, her voice shaking slightly but holding its clarity. "Please, just 5 minutes. Let me show you what I saw. As a law student, I implore you." The mention of law student caused a flicker of something new in Alistair's eyes, a sliver of curiosity cutting through the confusion. Julian Croft scoffed a short, ugly sound of derision. "A law student? Oh, this is rich," he said, turning to Alistair with a dismissive wave of his hand. "A first-year, no doubt, who thinks she's in a courtroom drama. Alistair, this is an embarrassment. Let's not allow this interruption to derail a momentous occasion." He gestured towards the contract, urging Alistair to complete the signature. Alistair, however, didn't move. He was a man who had built an empire not on impulse, but on careful observation of people. He had looked into the eyes of world leaders, desperate inventors, and brilliant scientists. And now he was looking into the eyes of a terrified waitress who had just willingly detonated her own life. What he saw there wasn't malice or insanity. It was a desperate, terrifying sincerity. He slowly, deliberately placed the cap back on the Mont Blanc pen and set it down. "What is it you think you saw, young lady?" Alistair asked, his voice quiet but firm, commanding the space around him. Before Clara could answer, Julian interjected, his voice rising in frustration. "Alistair, this is absurd. You're not actually going to listen to her, are you? This document has been reviewed by your own people, by Gavin Thorne himself." The mention of Gavin Thorne, Alistair's long-time, famously meticulous chief financial officer and trusted friend of 30 years, should have been the final word. It was meant to reassure Alistair and dismiss Clara completely. But for Alistair, it had the opposite effect. If Gavin had approved it, then any flaw would be impossible. Unless the flaw wasn't in the document itself, but in the trust he'd placed in others. "Let her speak, Julian," Alistair said, his tone leaving no room for argument. Julian Croft sat back, his face a thunderous mask of indignation. He crossed his arms, a clear signal that he was indulging this madness against his will. Mr. Dubois, seeing his cue from Finch, released Clara's arm, though he hovered nearby, wringing his hands. Clara's heart pounded. This was it. She had the flaw. "The jurisdiction and indemnification clauses, sir," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "The contract defaults to arbitration in the Grand Cayman, making it incredibly difficult and expensive to litigate any dispute outside of a system that heavily favors the corporation. And the indemnification clause on the final page. It appears to absolve Viridian Dynamics of all liability for everything, including misrepresentation and technological failure. It puts 100% of the risk on the investor. On you, sir." She delivered the information concisely, exactly as she would have in a legal brief. She didn't add emotion or speculation. She just stated the facts as she saw them. The air grew thick with tension. Alistair Finch slowly picked up the document again. He was not a lawyer, but he was a shrewd businessman. He flipped to the last page, his eyes scanning the dense text. He might not have understood the precise legal ramifications, but he could read the words Clara had pointed out. Held entirely harmless, operational non-performance, misrepresentation. Julian Croft laughed, but it was a brittle, hollow sound. "A standard liability waiver, Alistair. Pure boilerplate. Your law student Waitress is making a mountain out of a molehill. It protects our intellectual property from frivolous lawsuits." "Frivolous lawsuits," Clara countered, emboldened now. "That clause could be interpreted to protect you, even if the technology doesn't work at all. It's not boilerplate. It's a kill switch for your obligations." Alistair looked from the page to Clara, and then to Julian. He saw Julian's forced smile and the sweat beading on his temple. He saw Clara's terrified but resolute expression. One was selling him a future. The other was trying to save him from it. He folded the document neatly in half. "I think," Alistair said, his voice deceptively mild, "that it might be prudent to have my primary legal counsel, not just my CFO's office, take one final look at this. It's a significant investment after all. A 24-hour delay won't hurt." Julian Croft's face, for the first time, lost all its composure. A flash of pure, unadulterated panic crossed his features before he could suppress it. "A delay, Alistair, that's not possible. We have deadlines obligations to our suppliers. The momentum is critical. We need to sign tonight." His insistence, the sudden desperate pressure, was the final confirmation Alistair needed. It was the classic tell of a con man who knows his window of opportunity is closing. Alistair stood up, placing a hand on Clara's shoulder. "Young lady, you may have just lost your job, but you have my full attention. Please come with me. We have something to discuss." He turned to Julian. "I will be in touch tomorrow, Julian. Thank you for dinner." Without another word, Alistair Finch, one of the wealthiest men in the world, guided the stunned, jobless Waitress out of the Gilded Quill, leaving Julian Croft sitting alone in the silent booth, the $200 million contract lying on the table like a ticking bomb. The ride in Alistair Finch's car was a surreal experience for Clara. One moment she was in a waitress uniform smelling of truffle oil and anxiety. The next she was sitting on the impossibly soft leather of a custom Bentley Mulsanne, gliding silently through the streets of Manhattan. The city lights blurred past the tinted windows, a world away from the storm of emotions churning inside her. She had just committed career suicide and possibly saved a man from a catastrophic mistake, and she had no idea which of those two facts would define the rest of her life. Alistair was quiet for the first several blocks, his brow furrowed in deep thought. His head of security, a stern, powerfully built man named Marcus Vance, sat in the front passenger seat, occasionally glancing back at Clara in the rearview mirror with a look of intense, unreadable scrutiny. Finally, Alistair turned to her. "What is your name?" "Clara Russo, sir." "Clara Russo," he repeated, as if testing the weight of it. "You study law at Columbia, you said?" "Yes, sir. 3rd year. I work at the restaurant to cover my expenses." "And you risk a job that vital on a 2-second glance at a document?" Clara swallowed hard. "It wasn't just a glance, sir. Some phrases, they're designed to stand out if you know what to look for. They're alarm bells. My father, he lost everything to a man who used a contract with similar language. I suppose I'm sensitive to it." Alistair nodded slowly, a deep sadness in his eyes. "The world is full of sharks, Miss Russo, and sometimes even old fish like me forget how to spot them." He sighed, running a hand over his face. "I wanted to believe in this project so desperately, for my wife's legacy. It made me careless." He leaned forward. "Marcus, get me Gavin Thorne on the phone." Marcus dialed a number. A moment later he passed the phone back to Alistair. "Gavin." Alistair began his voice cordial but with an undercurrent of newfound caution. "I've decided to hold off on the Viridian signing. Something has come to my attention. Yes, I know you reviewed it. Just a final check. I'm sending a copy to Sullivan and Cromwell in the morning. A fresh pair of eyes. No need to discuss it further tonight. We'll speak tomorrow." He hung up, his expression grim. He was insistent, just like Julian. He said I was being paranoid. Alistair then turned his full attention back to Clara. "Miss Russo, you mentioned more than just the clauses. Was there anything else? Anything at all you noticed tonight? Any small detail?" Clara searched her memory, replaying the entire evening. "He was on his phone before you arrived," she recalled. "He was speaking quietly, but the restaurant was still empty. I think I heard him mention a name. Another company. It was something like Orion Holdings. He said something about transferring assets once the ink was dry." Alistair's eyes sharpened. He looked at Marcus. "Orion Holdings. See what you can find. I want our top cybersecurity and private investigation teams on it. Dig. I want to know everything about Julian Croft, about Viridian Dynamics, and about this Orion Holdings." "Right away, sir," Marcus said, already typing into a secure tablet. They drove Clara to her apartment building in Brooklyn, a far cry from the opulent mansions of the Upper East Side. As she got out, Alistair stopped her. "Miss Russo," he said, his voice sincere. "Regardless of what my team finds, what you did tonight took a level of courage and integrity that is exceedingly rare. I will not let it go unrewarded. First, you are not to worry about your employment. I will personally handle Mr. Dubois and ensure you are compensated for any lost wages. Second, I would like to retain you as a consultant until this matter is resolved. Your observations have already proven invaluable." He handed her a card. "This is Marcus's private number. He will be in touch tomorrow." Clara was speechless. "Thank you, sir." Thank you. As the Bentley pulled away, Clara stood on the cracked pavement, the business card feeling impossibly heavy in her hand. She looked up at her small apartment window and felt the first glimmer of hope she had felt in years. The next 24 hours were a blur of escalating revelations. The initial report from Alistair's team came in before dawn. Sullivan and Cromwell, one of the most powerful law firms in the world, confirmed Clara's fears in stark, terrifying terms. The contract was, in their words, predatory and grossly one-sided, a masterpiece of malicious legal architecture designed to strip the investor of all funds and rights with zero recourse. But that was only the beginning. The deeper they dug, the more horrifying the picture became. Viridian Dynamics was a shell. The address in Delaware was a P.O. box. The preliminary facilities in Nevada were a cleverly staged set in a rented warehouse filled with props and paid actors posing as scientists for a video presentation Alistair had been shown. The patents, which had been the cornerstone of the deal, were forgeries skillfully copied from a defunct German company's research from the 1990s. The true bombshell, however, came from the name Clara had provided Orion Holdings. Marcus Vance called Alistair at noon the next day, his voice grim. "Sir, we have a problem. A big one. Orion Holdings is a shell corporation registered in Panama. It's a ghost, but we traced its digital payment signature. And we found it. It's the same signature used by a network of shell companies involved in the Leadenhall Capital collapse in London 6 years ago, a massive fraud case. The mastermind was never caught, but the authorities have a name for their primary suspect, a man named Julian Croft." Alistair felt the blood drain from his face. "So he's a professional. One of the best, it seems," Marcus confirmed. "He vanishes for years between jobs, new identity, new scam. He preys on wealthy philanthropic individuals. He finds their emotional weakness and exploits it. For you, it was your wife's legacy." But the final, soul-crushing piece of the puzzle came not from an investigator, but from Alistair's own bank. Following a hunch, he had them trace the source of the initial wire transfer that had set up the escrow account for the Viridian deal. The account was supposed to have been vetted by his CFO, Gavin Thorne. The bank executive called him back, his voice hesitant. "Mr. Finch, there's an anomaly. The routing for the Viridian escrow account. It was authorized with your CFO's highest-level security credentials. But the subledger indicates that once your $200 million transfer cleared, a series of hidden automated transfers were programmed to begin. The funds would have been sliced up and funneled through a dozen different accounts, all linked to Orion Holdings, within 60 seconds of the deposit. By the time you realized anything was wrong, the money would be gone. Untraceable." Alistair sank into his chair. The betrayal was a physical blow. Julian Croft was the weapon, but the man who had aimed it at his heart, the man who had opened the gates and lowered the defenses, was his trusted friend and advisor of 3 decades. Gavin Thorne. The man who had managed his finances, who had sat at his dinner table, who had been a pallbearer at Eleanor's funeral. The man who had insisted he was being paranoid. The scam wasn't just a stranger's con. It was an inside job. The revelation of Gavin Thorne's betrayal struck Alistair Finch with the force of a physical blow. The $200 million he had almost lost felt insignificant compared to the shattering of a 30-year friendship. Gavin had been more than a CFO. He was a confidant, a fixture in Alistair's life, since they were both ambitious young men. He had helped Alistair build his philanthropic foundation, advised him on every major decision, and mourned Eleanor's passing alongside him. The idea that this entire time Gavin had been capable of such a profound and personal deception was almost impossible to comprehend. Alistair sat in his study, the room where he and Gavin had shared countless glasses of scotch and debated strategy and felt a cold, hollowing emptiness. Every memory was now tainted, every past success suspect. How long had Gavin been planning this? What other small betrayals had he missed? Marcus. Vance stood by the window, his expression grim. The evidence is overwhelming, sir. We've cross-referenced Gavin's travel logs. He's made 4 undocumented trips to the Cayman Islands in the last year. We've also uncovered encrypted communications between him and a burner phone registered to an alias we've now tied to Croft. Gavin was the architect. He identified you as the target. He fed Croft the personal details about Eleanor, about your passion for environmental causes, and he used his position to bypass the normal legal and financial fail-safes that would have flagged this deal. Why? Alistair asked, his voice barely a whisper. He was family. He wanted for nothing. We believe it was a combination of greed and resentment, Marcus explained, pulling up a file on his tablet. Gavin has significant gambling debts, mostly from high-stakes private poker games in Macau. We're talking millions. But more than that, our psychoanalyst consultant suggests a deep-seated inferiority complex. He saw himself as the brilliant mind behind your success, but he was always in your shadow. He lived off the salary you paid him while you were celebrated as the visionary. He wanted his own fortune, a legacy of his own, built on what he felt you owed him. The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. Gavin's subtle, resentful jokes about being just the bookkeeper. His increasing cynicism about Alistair's philanthropic projects. It had all been there, hidden in plain sight, but Alistair, blinded by friendship and trust, had refused to see it. The plan was now clear. They needed to act, but they needed to be smart. Croft and Thorne were a dangerous team. If they suspected the scheme was completely uncovered, they might vanish, the chance for justice disappearing with them. The FBI's white-collar crime division was discreetly brought in, but they advised Alistair to proceed as if he were still considering the deal. They needed to catch both men, preferably together. An idea began to form in Alistair's mind, a risky, dramatic, but ultimately fitting plan. He wanted to confront them. He wanted to look them both in the eye. And he wanted to do it in the very place where the scheme had almost succeeded. He called Clara Russo. Clara, he said, the use of her first name now feeling natural. I need to ask for your help one more time. It may be dangerous, but your presence is crucial. He explained the plan. He would arrange another dinner at the Gilded Quill under the pretense of finalizing the deal. He would tell Julian Croft that his lawyers had suggested some minor face-saving amendments, but that he was prepared to sign. He would also insist that Gavin Thorne be present to oversee the final transaction. The bait was the $200 million, a prize too tempting for them to resist, even if they were suspicious. The restaurant will be under surveillance, Alistair explained. FBI agents will be posing as staff and patrons. Marcus and his team will be on site, but I want you there at the table with me. Clara was silent for a moment. As a waitress, sir? No, Alistair said firmly. As my new special advisor. You started this, Clara. I want you there to see how it ends. Her acceptance was quiet but resolute. The night of the dinner arrived cloaked in a tense electric atmosphere. The Gilded Quill looked exactly the same, the soft lighting, the hushed conversations, the air of serene luxury. But tonight it was a theater of operations. The sommelier was a federal agent. The couple at the booth next to theirs were undercover officers. Every flower arrangement concealed a pinhole camera. Clara sat beside Alistair, dressed not in a waitress uniform, but in an elegant dark dress that Marcus's team had provided. She felt a profound sense of imposter syndrome, but looking at Alistair's calm, determined face gave her strength. Julian Croft and Gavin Thorne arrived together. Croft was the picture of confidence, his earlier panic seemingly forgotten. He believed his pressure tactics had worked. Gavin, on the other hand, looked nervous. His smile was strained, his eyes darting around the room. He was the insider, and he knew Alistair's habits. This sudden change of heart, this demand for a formal dinner, was not Alistair's usual style. "Alistair, so glad you saw reason," Croft said, sliding into the booth. "A momentary hiccup, nothing more." Gavin nodded, avoiding Alistair's gaze. "Alistair, I'm glad we could put this behind us. The deal is solid." "Indeed," Alistair said, his voice level. "It is a most educational deal. In fact, after reviewing the paperwork, I have a new proposal." He slid the leather-bound portfolio back to the center of the table. "I'm not going to invest 200 million. Croft's smile tightened. Gavin tensed. "What is this, Alistair?" Alistair leaned forward, his eyes locking onto Gavin's. "I'm considering investing far more. But first I need to clear up a few lingering questions. For instance, I'm curious about a small Panamanian company called Orion Holdings." The name dropped onto the table with the force of a grenade. Julian Croft's face went white. Gavin Thorne visibly flinched, knocking over his water glass. The sound of it shattering on the floor was the only noise in the suddenly silent booth. The trap was sprung. The shattering of the water glass broke the spell. Gavin Thorne stared at the spreading puddle on the white tablecloth, his face a mask of disbelief and horror. Julian Croft, ever the performer, recovered first, forcing a hollow laugh. Orion Holdings. "Alistair, what are you talking about?" "Some obscure shell company. This is about Viridian Dynamics. Let's not get distracted by fantasies cooked up by your waitress-turned-advisor." He shot a look of pure venom at Clara, who met his gaze without flinching. Alistair ignored him completely, his eyes still boring into Gavin. 30 years, Gavin. 30 years I trusted you. You were a brother to me. You sat at my table after Eleanor died, and you held my hand. And all the while you saw me as nothing more than a mark." Gavin finally looked up, his eyes filled with a desperate, cornered panic. "Alistair, I don't know what she's been telling you, but it's lies. I've spent my life protecting your assets, growing your fortune." "Protecting them?" Alistair's voice rose, a rare display of his iron will. "You programmed the escrow account to drain itself in 60 seconds. You fed this parasite personal details about my late wife to use as leverage against me. You didn't just try to steal my money, Gavin. You tried to steal her memory." At the mention of the escrow account's programming, the last vestiges of color drained from Gavin's face. That was a detail only the architect of the scheme could know. It was over. It was in that moment that Julian Croft made his move. He wasn't a fighter. He was a runner. He abruptly stood and tried to shove his way out of the booth. "This is insane. I'm leaving." But his path was instantly blocked. The man who had been sitting at the bar, a nondescript businessman in a grey suit, was suddenly on his feet, holding open a badge. "Julian Croft, you're under arrest. Please place your hands behind your back." Simultaneously, the couple from the next booth stood up and moved to flank Gavin Thorne. The sommelier approached the table, not with a wine bottle, but with a pair of handcuffs. The Gilded Quill had transformed from a restaurant into a federal sting operation. Croft, realizing the futility, didn't resist. His entire demeanor collapsed, the charisma and confidence evaporating to reveal a hollow, defeated man. Gavin, however, began to crumble. "Alistair, please," he pleaded, tears welling in his eyes. "I was in debt. They were threatening me. I never wanted. Save it, Gavin," Alistair said, his voice cold with the pain of betrayal. "You made your choice." As the agents led the two men away, a stunned silence settled over the restaurant's remaining patrons, the real ones who were now staring wide-eyed at the drama. The carefully constructed illusion of the Gilded Quill had been shattered. But the story wasn't quite over. As Croft was being escorted out, he stopped and looked back, not at Alistair, but at Gavin. A cruel, spiteful smile twisted his lips. "You think he was the mastermind?" Croft spat, his voice dripping with contempt. "This pathetic accountant. He was a pawn, a greedy, useful idiot, but a pawn nonetheless." Alistair, Marcus, and the lead FBI agent all froze. "What are you talking about, Croft?" the agent demanded. Croft seemed to savor the moment, the final desperate act of a man with nothing left to lose. "Gavin didn't have the connections to find someone like me. He didn't have the sophistication to structure the international accounts. He just provided the access and the target profile. The person who put us together, the one who really runs the show, is far closer to you, Alistair. The one who knew you were vulnerable. The one who knew exactly how much capital the Foundation had in liquid assets." A cold dread, even deeper than what he'd felt about Gavin's betrayal, washed over Alistair. It didn't seem possible. Who else could be so intimately involved? Croft's eyes gleamed with malice. "Ask yourself, Alistair, who stood to gain the most from your ruin? Who was always quietly resentful of the Foundation, getting the lion's share of your attention and funds, who has been advising you for years to take more aggressive financial risks?" Alistair's mind raced through a gallery of faces: board members, family friends, business associates. But only one person fit that description perfectly. A person so trusted, so embedded in his life, that the mere suggestion of their involvement felt like a sacrilege. Marcus Vance, listening intently, paled as he came to the same conclusion. He looked at Alistair, his expression one of pure shock. "It can't be." Alistair whispered the words, catching in his throat. Croft let out a final bitter laugh as he was pulled away. "Oh, it can. The call that set this all in motion didn't come from Gavin. It came from your own nephew, Robert Finch." The revelation hung in the air, more shocking than anything that had come before. Robert, his sister's son. The charming, ambitious young man Alistair had mentored, whom he had placed on the Foundation's junior board, and whom he had treated like his own child. The ultimate betrayal wasn't from a friend. It was from family. The arrest of Robert Finch was a quiet, somber affair. There was no dramatic confrontation in a restaurant. FBI agents apprehended him at his luxury apartment in Soho, a property Alistair had helped him secure as a graduation gift. The evidence, once they knew where to look, was damning. Encrypted emails, offshore bank accounts, set up in anticipation of the windfall, and a clear digital trail connecting him to the international syndicate Julian Croft worked for. Robert's motive was as old as time, a toxic brew of entitlement, greed, and burning resentment. He had grown up in the shadow of his uncle's immense success and philanthropic reputation. He saw the Foundation not as a force for good, but as a colossal inheritance being given away to strangers. In his twisted view, the $200 million wasn't something he was stealing. It was something he was reclaiming. Gavin Thorne had been his tool, a disgruntled employee he cultivated and manipulated, promising him a cut big enough to solve his debt problems and retire in luxury. For Alistair, this final betrayal was the most profound. It forced him to reevaluate everything he thought he knew about loyalty, family, and the nature of his own legacy. The money had been saved, but he felt a poverty of the spirit that was far more devastating than any financial loss could have been. In the weeks that followed, as the legal proceedings began, and the full extent of the conspiracy was laid out in sterile federal documents, Alistair retreated from his public life. He walked the halls of his vast home surrounded by masterpieces of art, but felt no joy. The empire he had built felt like a fortress with traitors inside the walls. It was Clara Russo who helped bring him back. A few weeks after the arrests, he invited her to his office. Not the grand, intimidating one at the foundation, but a small personal study in his home filled with books and photographs of Eleanor. "I haven't properly thanked you," he said, his voice quiet. "You didn't just save my company, Clara. You saved me from my own blindness." "I just did what I thought was right," she replied simply. She looked different now, away from the chaos of the restaurant and the sting operation. She seemed younger, less burdened a student once more. "That's the point," Alistair said, a sad smile touching his lips. "Doing what's right has become a shockingly rare commodity. You had everything to lose and nothing to gain. Yet you acted. That's a form of wealth that can't be measured on a balance sheet." He slid a thick envelope across his desk. "This is not a reward because what you did cannot be repaid. Consider it an investment. It will cover the remainder of your tuition at Columbia Law, your living expenses, and remove the entirety of your family's debt. No strings attached. I want you to be able to focus on your studies, on becoming the kind of lawyer the world desperately needs." Clara stared at the envelope, her eyes welling with tears. It was more money than her family had seen in a lifetime. It was freedom. It was a future. I don't know what to say, Mr. Finch," she stammered. "Say you'll accept it," he said gently. "And say you'll accept one more thing. When you graduate, I want you to come work for the Finch Foundation, not as an advisor, but as the head of our new internal compliance and ethics division. I need someone at my side whom I can trust implicitly, someone with a strong moral compass and the courage to speak up no matter who is sitting on the other side of the table." For the first time in weeks, Alistair felt a genuine spark of his old enthusiasm. The betrayals had taught him a painful lesson. His greatest vulnerability wasn't his wallet, but his unquestioning trust. He couldn't become a cynic that would be a betrayal of Eleanor's spirit. But he could become wiser. Clara Russo was his reminder that integrity could be found in the most unexpected of places. Clara, her life irrevocably changed, accepted. The waitress who had once served the city's titans in silence would now have a powerful voice among them. Her journey was just beginning, but she had already proven that sometimes the most powerful person in the room isn't the one with the most money, but the one with the clearest sight and the courage to speak the truth. Alistair Finch had lost a friend and a nephew, but he had gained something far more valuable, a renewed sense of purpose and a staunch ally in his mission to do good in the world. The Gilded Quill had almost been the site of his ruin, but instead it became the place where he found a different, more resilient kind of strength. In the end, this wasn't just a story about a foiled scam. It was a story about the collision of two worlds, one of immense power and blinding trust, the other of quiet observation and unshakable integrity. Alistair Finch learned the hard way that the most dangerous threats often come from those we hold closest, while our greatest saviors can appear in the most unexpected forms. For Clara Russo, a single moment of courage, a decision to risk everything for what was right, didn't just save a fortune. It forged a future she could never have imagined. Her voice, once lost in the hum of a restaurant, became a force for good. This story is a powerful reminder that you don't need $1 billion to make a world of difference. All you need is the courage to speak up when you see something wrong. If this story of courage and integrity moved you, please give this video a like to help us share it with more people. Subscribe to our channel and click the notification bell so you won't miss our next story about the hidden heroes and incredible events that shape our world. And please share this video with someone who needs a reminder that one person, one voice can truly change everything. Thank you for watching.